Welcome to Defeat Your Cravings, hosted by Dr. Glenn Livingston, PhD. Glenn has held his doctorate in psychology for more than 30 years and is also a former multi-million-dollar consultant to the big food industry and uses his experience to help you defeat your cravings. This show will help you to focus on dramatically reducing cravings and leave the diet mentality behind, so you can more easily and effortlessly achieve your health, fitness, and body composition goals. Please remember, no doctor-patient relationship is created via this show, and you are responsible for confirming any changes to your diet, health, or psychological routines with an appropriately licensed professional before implementing them. Now, before we get started, if you haven't yet downloaded the free smartphone app to access dozens of these recordings all in one place, as well as to avail yourself of a confidential community for support, motivation, and assistance, please visit the podcast link on defeatyourcravings.com as soon as possible. And now, here's your host, Dr. Glenn Livingston.
Hey, it's the very good Dr. Glenn Livingston with defeatyourcravings.com. And I'm here with one of my favorite people and yours, John Chancellor from Teach the Soul. How are you, John?
I'm doing well. And yourself?
Good. Really good. So we were talking the other day, and you mentioned this thing about the no diet and an interesting study. Could you maybe just go over that study and what you think it means? It was the study, right? Am I correct?
It was a psychological study, a study with, say, an experiment, and it was conducted by Professor Fletcher at the University of Hertfordshire in the UK, and it happened about 20 years ago. And the study had nothing to do with diets. He was studying what he called fit science, which is the framework for internal transformation. He was doing experiments trying to improve the process for transforming behavior. And so he recruited a few groups of participants, and it was a really interesting thing he did. He gave each of them a set of cards, and just for reference, we'll say they were 3 by 5. I have no idea if they were business card or what, but small cards. They were printed on both sides, and they had opposite behavioral traits. On one side would be like introvert, and if you flipped it over, the next side would be extrovert. One side would be generous, flip it over, stingy. One side would be reactive, flip it over, proactive. He gave each participant a set of cards, and they had a dozen or so different characteristics on each side of the card. And the instructions were for the participants each day to pick a card, look at it, look at both sides, and see which side was their normal behavior. That is to say, were they normally quiet as opposed to being gregarious? If they were normally quiet, then that day they should try to be really outgoing, gregarious, lively. And the instructions were also that they were to do something that was outside their normal range of activities at least twice a week. So that was the instructions to the participant. Is that clear?
Yes, very.
Okay. So at the start of the study, like I guess any good study, they took a lot of the characteristics of each participant. They gathered vital statistics, information about them, their date of birth, their age, their general health. And one of the things they did, and I'm not quite sure why they did it, but they weighed each person at the beginning of the study. The study went on for 4 months. And at the end of the study, they collected data about each person and they weighed them again. And on average, each person had lost 11 pounds.
With no instructions to lose weight.
No instructions. They were not told to change their diet. Diet did not come up in any way in the instructions about the experiment. They were just given the instructions to take a card each day, see what their normal behavior was, the one that matched them the closest, and they were to do the opposite that day, and then twice a week, do something outside their normal range of behavior. Only instructions, but on average, each person in the group lost 11 pounds over a 4-month period. So that's a very effective diet. That's right at 2.25 pounds a month. So that's a pretty effective diet for not being on a diet. I don't know if you have any thoughts or questions about why they lost weight.
I would love your perspective. One of the very strong hypotheses I have after working with thousands of people that we work with is that a big part of what causes binge eating is distress. I call it organismic distress. That could be things like just too much input and too much decision making and overwhelm. It could be not getting enough sleep. It could be not getting enough water. It could be being isolated from your friends and family. There are a lot of things that can cause that. But overall, I find that when people are incapable of using their rational brain to make good decisions about food, it's usually because they're distressed about something. Then there's the whole area of work about what's in your rational brain and making sure that's correct, fixing your thinking. But it's not enough to fix your thinking. You have to manage your distress. And one of the number one things that causes organismic distress in overeaters is concern about their weight and the necessity to diet. So it's almost like dieting is always counterproductive. It makes it more difficult to use your rational brain because you put yourself in a semi-starvation state and you're panicked about losing weight, and your brain feels the panic and it says, we must need more resources. So screw it, forget all your silly rules. Let's just, binge, yummy.
Right.
I think that what this study is illustrating is that when people's focus was not only taken off their diet, but also put onto something constructive. Like, these people were not just told, well, don't diet. But you could argue that's what we do, that we tell people don't diet. But we also give them very specific things to do, to work on specific rules and understanding their big why and fixing their thinking about food. And these people were given constructive things to do totally outside of the realm of food, which probably reduced their distress even further.
Well, yes, Professor Fletcher had a slightly different take on it. What most of us do, and you can think about the last time you went to a restaurant, or if you have a favorite restaurant that you go to, what do you order? Generally, most people will find a dish that they like, and about 90% of the time, they will order the same thing. If you ask people to make a list of the dishes that they eat on a daily basis, like breakfast, lunch, you will find that even though they have a wide variety of options, they're generally a very limited number of dishes that they actually eat. What Professor Fletcher advanced as a theory was that we do things automatically without thinking that much about them. That is to say, we will eat mindlessly. We'll eat the same thing. We don't pay much attention to what we're doing, what we're eating. We're doing today what we did yesterday. We're going through the motions. So when the people had to consciously try to act differently than what they normally did, they broke the pattern of acting out of habit, and they started doing things consciously rather than unconsciously out of habit. So over that period of time, doing that for 4 months was enough time to get the people to start noticing what they were doing and be conscious about what they were doing. So his theory is that it applies that the diet, or the no diet diet, was simply a byproduct, that it has applications in a lot of different areas of our life, in most areas of our life, because most of the things we do unconsciously out of habit. We watch the same news, the TV programs. We engage in the same activities today that we did yesterday without consciously thinking about it. Getting in the habit of paying attention to what you're doing, because when you have to, say if you're normally an introvert and you have to act the extrovert for the day, you have to pay attention to what you're doing. And so his theory was that by being more consciously aware of what we're actually doing, we start making a lot better decisions.
It forces you into your observing ego.
Absolutely.
Or into the pop psychology terms that I made famous, it separates you from your pig.
Absolutely.
It interferes with the automaticity of overeating behavior loops and gets you to think of very interesting. So, but the takeaway would be for everybody listening, just do something different every day for the next 2 months. That would be the takeaway, not necessarily having to do with food. Just be a different person in one way or another, some behavior or another, some thought process or another for the next 2 months and watch what happens.
Absolutely. Anybody that's listening could actually go through this experiment themselves. They could get them a dozen index cards and write down contrasting behaviors like aggressive, passive, introvert, extrovert.
Assertive.
Sure.
I don't want to be blamed for someone going on a road rage.
Well, assertive, yes, that's a better term. Assertive, passive, stingy, generous, extrovert, introvert, friendly, reserved. Write down those things and then each day pick one card and see which behavior is closest to your normal behavior and do the opposite of that. I guess you don't want to go crazy about it, but you want to be consciously trying to go through that day. If you're normally reserved, you want to be speaking to people in the elevator, speaking to people as you walk by them in the hall, on the street, that sort of thing. You can carry this out yourself. It's very easy to do. And what you'll find, I think, is that you'll become much more aware. You'll pay attention to what you're doing. One thing that I've associated with this lesson is a quote from Ovid, who was a Roman poet that lived some 2,000 years ago. And one of his quotes that I really like is, "Nothing is stronger than habit." And when you think about it, that's the way we live the majority of our life, is out of habit, doing the same things that we did yesterday, the day before, we do the same things. And if we try to change behavior on big, important things, those are too frightening. Those are too scary. But if we change small things, like instead of walking down the street, looking down at the sidewalk, you walk down the street looking at people in the eye and saying hello to them, little things like that, it flows over into the rest of your life. The big things in your life will change automatically just because you're paying attention.
So I have a story to end this with, which underscores the point. We're not really related to losing weight or anything like that, but related to how doing something differently can lead to tremendous insights. A lot of people know that I wrote my dissertation on dreams and creativity, which led me in my 20s to run creative problem-solving groups for big companies. It's actually a lot of fun. We get all these executives around, we play all these games, and we come up with all these really cool ideas. Among the more successful of them was a creativity session I did for a major manufacturer of bathroom cleaner products, particularly toilet bowl cleaners. And one of the first things I had them do in the workshop was to excuse themselves and go to the bathroom sitting backwards on the toilet. No one had ever thought to sit backwards on the toilet, so they spent precious little time looking at all the nooks and crannies and crevices and figuring out where all the extra little problems were. And their minds just exploded with ideas. They came back and I was creativity god for a little bit. It didn't last that much longer, but I would even challenge people that what if you went and sat on your toilet bowl backwards? How could that change your perspective of the day? What would you notice that you hadn't noticed before? And give yourself the instruction that it's going to open up new possibilities for you. I'm not suggesting that you use the toilet backwards every day of your life, but one day today, what if you sat backwards on the toilet bowl? Okay, I can't believe I said that on a public podcast, but what if that happens?
I think that's humorous and very interesting. But again, the whole thing is if we start paying conscious attention to the things we do, because so much of what we do, and you said it before, is automatic.
It's the self-actualization button. It opens up a space between stimulus and response.
Yes.
You can make different choices. I remember I had a teacher, I took an improvisational class, and this was for theater. And he told me to think of walking as the act of throwing myself off balance and catching myself again. What you really do when you're walking is throwing yourself off balance and catching yourself. And the moment I thought of that, I felt so different in my body, and it's like my mind opened up to all these other possibilities. I had another person who told me, this might have been my ex-wife, she said to walk around the block every day and notice something different that you'd never noticed before. Pick a block you walk around all the time and notice something different. And I remember noticing this older man talking to his grandson, I think it was. And I remember noticing the way the light and shadow fell through the tree on the sidewalk. And I saw a couple of cracks on the sidewalk I hadn't seen before. And I noticed the smell of the ocean in a way. It was the bay in Bayville, Long Island, that I hadn't smelled before. And I was amazed that for 30 days, I could actually notice something different every day. You get into these routines and everything seems automatic and old hat, but just a slight shift in perspective and all these possibilities open up.
Yes, absolutely.
I hope that helps everyone.
Yes, great story.
Thank you for doing this.
You're quite welcome.
And that brings us to the end of today's broadcast of Defeat Your Cravings, hosted by Dr. Glenn Livingston. Now, if you'd like to find out more about the products and services Dr. Glenn offers to help you dramatically reduce your cravings and stop overeating in 90 days or less, please visit defeatyourcravingscoaching.com. That's defeatyourcravingscoaching.com. Thanks.